And so anytime you can use notes on a test, I would recommend it. All right, so this first one, we have to decide which type of factoring. It already equals 0, so that's good. It already equals 0, but we look at these, this only has 2 terms. And remember with factoring, you should always look for a GCF first. So if I look for a GCF, these 2 terms have a GCF. There's a 5x that goes into both of them. So I'm going to take a 5x out. And again, what we're trying to do here is we're trying to find the answers that work for this equation, and we're using factoring to do that in this case. So if I take a 5x out of each term, I'm left with 2x, and I'm left with a -1. Now once we factored, last chapter, that's all we did, we stopped. But this chapter, what we're trying to do is we're trying to find the solution. So now we're going to set each of those factors equal to 0. And there becomes 2 pretty simple equations, in my opinion, to solve. So we're able to solve each of these. So 5x equals 0, so I would divide each side by 5. So x would be just 0, because 0 divided by anything is just 0. And then the other one that I go to solve, I have to move that 1 over. 0 plus 1 is just 1. I'm going to divide by 2. And so I find out my other answer would be 1/2. So we get 2 solutions using our factoring. So always look for a GCF first. So that's going to be my clue to you guys, that that's going to be something you should check for. Now the next ones, we went from, I think if you notice the GCF, I think those are probably the easiest factoring to do. The next one that we're doing, I think, is the toughest. And so we're going to go to that next. And then these 2 are more straightforward. It'll be good once we get them equal to 0, I think. So this next one is already set equal to 0. But there's no GCF. There's no number that goes into 4, 11, and 6. So this is the kind we have to do the x factor. Now, I will tell you guys, there's going to be only one of these on the test. So if you hate this type of factoring, there's one question, put your best effort forward, see how it goes, like show me that you know that there should be an x here. Give me something, don't just leave it blank, but there's only going to be one on the test like this. So if you guys recall, we take these 2 terms and we multiply them together. And then we put that bottom, or that middle number on the bottom. And this is the kind we want to multiply to get 24, but add to get -11. Multiply to get 24, but add to get -11. Now, since that's a positive number we're multiplying to get and a negative we're adding, we want them both to be negative. And so I'm going to start my little list here. And if you check, -3 and -8, if I add them together, they give me a -11. So I'm going to do a -3x, a -8x. And what we do with that is we use that to split this middle term. And this one, we might not have a ton of room. Sorry, I probably should have given more space for this one. So I'm going to try to write kind of small here. So what we do is we split that middle term up using those 2 new terms. And this is where we do grouping. So out of the first 2 terms, we can take out an x. Out of the next 2 terms, we can take out a -2. So there's our factors. Let's say you have absolutely no idea how to get those factors. Give me some factors and set them equal to 0 and solve. So even if you're stuck on a question like this and you're like, I don't think these are right, still keep going. Show me that you know that now I need to set each of those factors equal to 0. So just leaving a question blank in a math test, it doesn't give me much to work with. I can always do partial credit for you, so I want to make sure that I give you guys all the possible points you can get. But now we're going to solve each of these. So I have two equations to solve. The second one's really easy. I just add 2, so I get x is 2. The first one, a little more complicated. And I get 3/4 for the other one. So we get 2 answers again. There's a little harder to come by for these types. Okay. And for our homework tonight, I'm having you guys just practice the factoring because we actually didn't have any factoring practice on last night's homework or last class's homework. So just so that you know that this is solely our homework tonight, just so that we can practice this, like these types of problems. Issue with the next two is they both don't equal 0. So before we get started on these next two, we have to set them equal to 0. So we have to move whatever's away over. So we're going to move the 8x back over in this first one. Now when I do that, I'm going to write it in that specific order, that standard form, because it's easier for me to factor. So I moved the 8x over, but I put it in the middle because that's where we're used to having it written. Now I think a majority of you are pretty good at this type of factoring. This is the kind where there's nothing in front of the x squared and has 3 terms. So on our factoring chart, I believe this is like the second column. We automatically go to x and x. So we don't have to worry about making that big x thing. We can just use the x and x to know that that's going to be the first half. We want to multiply to get 12, but add to -8. So likewise with the last problem, we need them both to be negative. And so it's that second one again, so -2 -6. We just can't forget that when they're asking us to solve here, we're looking for 2 answers. So now we still need to find those 2 outcomes. So we have to do x minus 2 could equal 0, and x minus 6 could equal 0. In my opinion, these are a lot easier to solve. They're only one-step equations. And so I don't even know that you need to show that you added 2 or that you added 6. But you do need to show that that's our answer after we factored it. All right, our next one here, again, we need it to equal 0. So we're going to move that 18 over. So to make it equal 0 first, and again, it's another one where it's that type of factoring where, again, I think most of you guys are pretty good at this, even if you didn't do well in the last test. Once I reminded you of this type, you're pretty good at it, I think. So we want to multiply to -18, but add to +3. So I think that's our list there. And the one that adds to +3 is -3, +6. +3 we want to get. And so again, we're just solving each of these. So we get a +3 and a -6. And I'll tell you guys, these 4 questions are very similar to what our test looks like for these types of questions. There's 4 questions, almost identical to this, just trying to show that you know how to factor each of these ways and that you can solve that once we factor. Okay? So that's what our homework is going to look like tonight. The rest of our notes, I just wanted to do some practice problems with you guys beyond that. So we're moving on to our graph. And again, if you having your off-white sheet out, graphing is one of our ones on that chart. Now, specifically the chart's talking about solving by graphing. And this one's not necessarily asking us to solve, but it's still asking us to graph. So you will have to graph on the test. So it says to graph this. So if you guys recall, we have to find that vertex. And on your chart, you should have put the formula x equals negative b over 2 times a. And I mentioned it when we were making the chart. That part of, you might start to notice that's part of the big quadratic formula, so that's not a coincidence. So that doesn't just come out of nowhere. But I like listing what A, B, and C are. So we have our A, B, and C. So A is 1, B is negative 6, and C is negative 1. So it looks like B is a negative 6, so that means we're going to do positive 6 over 2 times A, so 2 times 1. So x ends up being 3. That's the first part of our vertex. We have to find the second half by substituting that back in. Let's do negative 10. Yeah? No. Yeah, is that it? Negative 10? Yeah. Okay. So over 3 down 10. So what we do from here, and I don't know if we've completely graphed one much together recently, we go and put that in the middle of our table. So 3, negative 10 is a point that we're going to put in the center of our table. Sorry about that. And then I'm just going to pick numbers smaller and larger than that. So I'm going to go 2, 1, 4, 5, and we're going to substitute back in. So when I substitute it back in, when I substitute 2 in, I get 4 minus 12 minus 1, so negative 9, I believe. And the same thing's going to happen on the other side because of symmetry. I substitute 1 in. This will be negative 6 on both sides. Our parabola looks something like that. When you guys are ready, you can flip the page over.
You want to see my paper? It's not mine.
So on the back side, I graphed one for you. And I don't know if you can read it very clearly. Sorry, I took a picture of a picture, so it's a little bit rough here. And the way it's kind of set up, it's kind of confusing because it like goes up by twos. I don't know if you can see that. So they want to know the solutions for the graph. And remember, the solutions are on the x-axis. So the solutions would be those two values. And again, I can't tell if you can see that that's the x-axis. It's not a great drawing. So those are our two solutions. So that's at -4 and +2. So on a parabola, the solutions show up on the x-axis. So I'm just looking for those 2 points. Just like when I was factoring, I solved by factoring and I got 2 answers. For our graph, we could get up to 2 answers based off of the drawing. Then they want an approximate location of the vertex. And the vertex is just the very bottom of the graph. And again, it just says approximate because, again, the graph is a little bit strange. But it looks like if it's in between 0 and -2, I'd say it looks like about -1. And then it looks like this is 2, 4, 6, 8. So I'd say like -9. That looks like about it. And I just want to point out something we talked about with parabolas like this. We would call this a minimum point. If I can spell minimum. Because this is the lowest the graph will ever be, it always would be higher than that. It would never come back down. So we would say that would be a minimum. If it was flipped over, it would be a maximum point. Okay. So there'll be a question similar to this. It'll be graphed better than this though. Again, I just found a picture of a picture and so it didn't copy very well. All right, our next thing is solving by the quadratic formula. So I'm hoping that you guys all got the quadratic formula down on your chart last class. And that should be that first column on your chart. Now, the first step of the quadratic formula though is I need to make sure it equals 0. So I'm going to move this 6 over. Because then I can tell for sure what A, B, and C are and what the signs of all of them are. So my A would be 2, my B would be 1, my C would be -6. And making sure your quadratic formula is written down correctly is super important so that you don't like have something written down wrong and then your formula is wrong on the test. So x equals the opposite of b, so -1 plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4 times a times c all over 2a. So I put everything into my formula. And hopefully you guys are getting better at this. That's becoming a little bit more doable for you. Again, the formula should not be a mystery. You should all have this chart tomorrow. Now 1 squared is just 1. -2 times 6, or -4 times 2 times 6. It's positive 48, I believe. All over 4. So it's going to be a positive 49 under there. So again, if you like knowing how to put that into your calculator and getting the right number underneath the square root is so important. Now square root of 49 happens to be a nice number. It's 7. So I have 2 options here. I have -1 plus 7 divided by 4 and -1 minus 7 divided by 4. So I'm going to do each of those. So this is going to end up being 6 over 4, which is 3 over 2, or 1.5, and -8 over 4, which ends up being -2. And I just went back to double check I didn't lose a negative somewhere in there. I know I've done this wrong before with just having the wrong sign, so not losing that negative on the 1. So that's our quadratic formula. And I will tell you guys there will be 2 questions with quadratic formula on it on the test. So again, using that first chart there, or the first column on your chart. All right, last thing is the 2 types of square roots. And those are the next 2 columns that we haven't used yet, or I guess the middle 2 columns on your chart there. There's 2 different types of square roots that we'll be able to do. Now, remember that if you're going to take the square root of a negative, we just say that's not a solution. It doesn't work. We don't know how to do that quite yet. So if you had a square root of a negative, it's perfectly fine to say this isn't possible. But I will tell you guys that won't come up a bunch of times on the test. Maybe once where you'd have a square root of a negative. So if you're getting that a bunch of times, something's going wrong. Okay. So our first one is the square root without the parentheses. So we're just going to isolate the squared. And it tells us to solve by square root. And again, on the test, it will look like this, where it'll tell you to solve by square root. So you don't have to determine which type to use. It'll tell you to use that. So we're going to get that x squared alone. So we're going to move the 1 over. Then we're going to divide by 4. And so I get x squared equals 3. So to undo squared, we do square root. But remember, we do the positive and negative square root of 3. So again, so important to have a calculator because I don't know the square root of 3 off the top of my head. And so knowing how to put that into your calculator, I'm going to want it as a decimal. And I typically will say like 2 decimal places, I believe. So it'll be plus or minus 1.73. And that'll be it. That's all you do then. Just don't forget the negative 1, because it won't tell you to do that. Whereas the next problem, we're isolating this parenthesis. So we're going to move the 7 over first. We're going to divide by 4. And at this point, this is where we have to take the square root. So we're going to take the square root of each side. And the left side will just be left with x minus 3. The right side, we're going to take the square root of 25, which will be plus or minus 5. So just like we did with the quadratic formula, we're going to set up 2 equations. We're going to say x minus 3 could equal 5, and x minus 3 could also equal a negative 5. And we're going to find each of those solutions. So we're going to find out x is 8 is one of our solutions, and also negative 2. So again, if you guys, so last class we were supposed to make this chart. If for some reason you lost your chart already, I do have blank ones. I would suggest rewriting that. Please do not go without that. If you need a gold chart still, I will print some of those for tomorrow. So, and if you don't, I mean, I'll print enough that if you don't like yours or whatever. But I'm not printing the one we made last class. So this one you guys have to have. If you don't have it today, you should work on getting that taken care of. Now our homework, you guys, is all just factoring. Now the reason for that is because there was no factoring in our homework last time. So all of this is factoring, practicing that way. So if you want to practice any of the other ways, that would have been from last homework. So like, I think factoring is the one that we've kind of left out in terms of practice.